The sun had barely begun to dip below the horizon as Marcus Tate made his way through the bustling terminal of Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The late afternoon rush was in full swing, travelers darting between gates, dragging luggage behind them, the sharp echo of hurried footsteps mingling with the distant hum of announcements over the intercom. The air was thick with the low murmur of voices, the shuffle of shoes against the polished floors, and the occasional clink of a suitcase handle. In this sea of activity, Marcus moved with a steady purpose, his eyes focused on the sign above Gate B12. Dressed in a worn leather jacket that had seen better days, a faded gray t-shirt, and dark jeans stained with oil from years of working on cars, Marcus looked like just another face in the crowd. But beneath the rugged exterior, there was a quiet pride that he carried with him, like a badge of honor. For the first time in years, Marcus was about to experience something most people like him could only dream of: a seat in first class. He had earned it, every single inch of it. Years spent under the hoods of cars, days and nights working long hours in his auto repair shop, and now as a business owner with a chain of repair shops across Chicago, he had earned this rare moment to join the elite. He approached the gate agent, a young woman with a tight ponytail, and handed over his boarding pass with a practiced calm. She smiled briefly, her eyes flicking down to his ticket before she waved him through. No questions, no hesitation. Marcus nodded, tucking the torn boarding pass into his pocket, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The cool breeze hit his face as he crossed the tarmac, his heart beating a little faster, a mixture of excitement and disbelief. For a moment, as he made his way toward the plane, he let himself imagine sinking into the plush first-class seat, letting the world below shrink away. He pictured himself with a cold drink in hand, feet stretched out in front of him, the noise of the world muffled, a small triumph after years of struggle. The fantasy was shattered the instant Victor Langston walked into his line of sight. Langston moved with the air of someone who owned the world. A towering figure in his late 40s, he was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that seemed to cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back with precision, and a gleaming gold watch caught the fluorescent light as he approached the gate. It wasn't just the suit or the polished leather shoes or the sleek rolling suitcase he dragged behind him. It was the way he moved, like he was used to being the center of attention, like he owned the airport. And, in his mind, he did. As Marcus neared the plane's entrance, he saw Langston look him up and down, his gaze lingering for a fraction too long on Marcus's worn jacket and scuffed sneakers. A sneer curled at the corner of Victor's lips, though it was subtle enough to be dismissed as a reflex. But it wasn't lost on Marcus. It never was. The judgment was there, plain as day, even before they exchanged a single word. Marcus stepped inside the cabin, scanning for his seat. It was 2A, right by the window. He slid into the plush leather seat, a quiet exhale escaping his lips as he settled into the comfort, feeling the tension in his body melt away just a little. This was his reward, a moment to savor. The view outside the window was nothing spectacular, just the tarmac and baggage handlers in their fluorescent vests, hustling to and fro. But to Marcus, it was everything. He had built something from nothing, and now, in this small moment, he was sitting among those who were typically the ones in control. It was a brief taste of the life he'd worked for. As he looked out the window, the hum of the plane's engines began to vibrate through the cabin. For a moment, he felt untouchable. And then, with a thud that rattled the cabin, Victor Langston dropped into the aisle seat beside him. 2B. The moment was shattered. Victor's suitcase clattered into the overhead bin, the sound sharp and jarring, before he settled into the seat beside Marcus. The man's presence immediately filled the small space between them, a stark contrast to Marcus's quiet, unassuming energy. Victor adjusted his suit jacket with a practiced ease, his knee brushing against Marcus's space as he shifted. The tension was palpable, as if an unspoken challenge hung in the air between them. Marcus tried to ignore it, shifting in his seat, his gaze trained out the window again. He wasn't here to play games. He'd earned this seat just as much as anyone else. Maybe more so. But it didn't matter. Victor wasn't done sizing him up. "Must be a charity event today," Victor's voice rang out, cutting through the low hum of the cabin. He leaned back in his seat, stretching his legs out, and his eyes flicked over Marcus once more. lingering on the frayed cuffs of his jacket, the worn edges of his sneakers. Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd dealt with guys like this before, people who thought that money made them better than everyone else, that their wealth gave them the right to judge. But he wasn't going to let this man with his smug smile and condescending tone get under his skin. Not today. I paid for this seat, Marcus responded, his voice steady but firm, locking eyes with Victor. Just like you. Victor's smirk faltered, but only for a moment, like a crack in an otherwise solid mask. He straightened up, adjusting his cufflinks in an exaggerated motion. Sure you did, he muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But standards sure have dropped these days, huh? The words landed with a thud, cutting deeper than Marcus wanted to admit. It wasn't just the insult about his clothes. It was the implication that he didn't belong here, in this space that was reserved for the wealthy and the powerful. The thought gnawed at him, but he kept his expression neutral, unwilling to give Victor the satisfaction of a reaction. As the plane taxied down the runway, the noise of the engines drowning out most of the chatter in the cabin, Marcus fought the urge to let his anger show. He wasn't here to get into a shouting match. He was here because this flight was a milestone, a symbol of everything he'd worked for. So he focused on the window once more, letting the blur of the city below fade as the plane climbed higher into the sky. But Victor wasn't done. No, he was just getting started. Tell me something. Victor leaned in closer, his voice a low murmur meant only for Marcus. What's it like to get handed everything? To just waltz into first class, like you own it? Marcus's hands tightened around the armrest, the leather creaking under his grip. The anger burned in his chest again, hot and familiar. But this time, he let it simmer beneath the surface. He wasn't going to let Victor turn this into a spectacle. I didn't get handed anything, Marcus replied quietly, his voice razor-sharp. I built this life. Victor's face twitched, surprise maybe, or disbelief, but it was gone before Marcus could fully read it. Victor shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie and pulling out his tablet, clearly dismissing Marcus as no more than an annoyance. Marcus leaned his head back against the seat, letting the soft hum of the engines fill the space around him. But the words hung in the air, like a storm that was just waiting to break. He didn't know how long this tension would last, but he could feel it building, a pressure that was getting harder to ignore. Outside, the clouds stretched out endlessly, white and fluffy, a sea of cotton in the sky. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere felt thick, charged with an energy that had nowhere to go. And Marcus knew, without a doubt, that the flight was far from over. Victor wasn't just a rude businessman. He was a spark, waiting for fuel. And Marcus had a sinking feeling that the fire was already starting to catch. The plane had leveled out, cruising steadily at 35,000 feet. The hum of the engines was a constant companion, a low vibration that seemed to match the rhythm of Marcus's thoughts. He stared out the window, his eyes tracing the endless stretch of clouds below, the golden edges catching the dying light of the day. Miami was still a distant horizon, but the city's warmth already seemed to beckon him, a reminder of why he was here. This flight wasn't just a luxury, it was a stepping stone in a much larger journey. His fingers drummed nervously on the armrest, the leather creaking softly under his grip. The tension in the cabin was palpable, but for a brief moment, Marcus allowed himself to breathe, to forget about the man sitting beside him. Victor Langston. He wasn't here for confrontation. He wasn't here to prove anything to Victor or anyone else. But that fleeting peace didn't last long. Victor's voice cut through the quiet of the cabin, louder than necessary, as if he were trying to make sure the whole row could hear. I've got to say, I didn't expect to see someone like you in first class, he remarked, his tone dripping with thinly veiled mockery. Marcus felt the familiar burn of indignation rise in his chest. The words weren't a question, but an accusation, a challenge that said, quite plainly, you don't belong here. Marcus kept his gaze forward, but his jaw tightened. He wasn't going to rise to the bait. Not yet. Instead, he pressed his lips together, his knuckles white around the armrest, willing himself to remain calm. But he could feel Victor's eyes on him, like a hawk sizing up its prey, waiting for the moment to strike. Must be nice to finally make it to the top, huh? Victor continued, leaning back in his seat with the kind of arrogance that only wealth and privilege seemed to nurture. He adjusted his cufflinks, the gold flashing briefly in the dim light. But tell me, how does it feel, really, to be surrounded by people who actually have something to show for their success? Marcus's pulse quickened at the implication. The idea that, because he came from humble beginnings, because he had worked with his hands for years, somehow disqualified him from this seat, from this moment. He wanted to snap back, to tell Victor everything he had built from scratch, from nothing. But instead, he sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the window, focusing on the distant city skyline as they soared higher. Victor wasn't done, though. No, he never was. Victor leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, mocking whisper meant only for Marcus to hear. "I bet you don't even know how to enjoy a flight like this," he said, the words slipping out like venom. "You're probably just hoping you don't spill something on your worn-out jacket. Too bad, you've already ruined it with that coffee spill." His eyes glinted with malicious amusement as he flicked his gaze to Marcus's jacket, the fabric now a reminder of his earlier insult. Marcus's hands tightened on the armrest, the leather creaking under his grip. The burn of humiliation began to rise again, stoking the fire he had tried to keep buried. He could feel his muscles tensing, but he kept his voice even, calm. "I'm not here to impress you, Langston," he said, his tone sharp. "I'm here because I earned it." Victor chuckled, the sound laced with disbelief. He sat back in his seat, crossing his legs with exaggerated leisure. "Earned it? You? This isn't about hard work. This is about who you know, what you've got, and where you fit in. People like you just don't fit in here." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes cold and calculating. "I don't know how you got here, but you're not like the others. You'll never be one of them." The words hit Marcus like a slap. A wave of anger rose in him, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he turned his head just enough to meet Victor's gaze. The older man's eyes narrowed, as if daring Marcus to fight back. But Marcus didn't flinch. "I've worked harder than you've ever had to," Marcus said, his voice steady, though a storm brewed inside him. "I've built my life from the ground up. I didn't buy my way here." For a split second, Victor's expression faltered, a crack in his armor. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by that same smug smirk. "Sure you did," he said, the sarcasm dripping from his words. "I'm sure that's what it took. But the reality is, the only reason you're here is because you've somehow slipped through the cracks." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of Victor's words settling on him like a heavy burden. He knew this wasn't just about the flight, or about first class. It was about something much bigger, about the way the world saw him, the way people like Victor saw him, as an outsider, as less than. The silence between them was thick with unspoken tension. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, their voices soft and polite, offering drinks and snacks. But the storm between Marcus and Victor still raged silently. Marcus's thoughts raced, his pulse quickening. He had fought for everything he had, his business, his success, his place in the world. And here, in this moment, Victor was trying to take it all away with a few careless words. But Marcus wouldn't let him. Not today. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, casting a warm golden glow across the clouds. The city of Miami was finally in sight, its skyline rising in the distance. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to focus on the beauty outside the window, to push the anger aside. He wasn't going to let Victor ruin this. Not now. Not when he was so close to reaching his goal. But the tension in the air was undeniable, and Marcus knew deep down that this wasn't over. The flight was far from smooth, and there was more turbulence ahead, both in the air and between them. The question was, how far would Victor go to prove he was right? And more importantly, how far would Marcus go to prove he belonged here? The flight had settled into its rhythm, the soft hum of the engines a constant undercurrent to the scattered conversations around the cabin. Marcus had hoped the worst of it was behind him, the jabs from Victor, the weight of the man's assumptions and insults. But as the hours passed, it became clear that this flight was far from over. The tension between them simmered just beneath the surface, a barely contained storm waiting for the right spark to ignite it. Victor, ever the instigator, didn't let the silence last long. Every so often, he would lean forward, his voice cutting through the cabin like a blade. "I've been thinking," Victor began, his tone smooth, like butter on a hot pan. "People like you, they think they're just one lucky break away from being one of us. But you're wrong. It takes more than hard work to get into the right circles. It takes the right connections, the right opportunities, and that's something well, you just don't have." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He could feel the familiar stir of anger rising in him, but he held it back. He didn't want to engage. Not yet. He wasn't about to let this man draw him into a verbal battle, not when the stakes were so much higher than the petty insults Victor was throwing his way. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed out the window, his fingers tapping against the armrest in a rhythm that matched the beat of his thoughts. "I'm not here to make friends with you," Marcus finally said, his voice low but firm. "I didn't come here for your approval." Victor smirked, leaning back in his seat, clearly unfazed. "Oh, I'm sure you didn't, but you're in my world now, the one you're so desperate to be a part of. And trust me, no one here cares about your backstory. They only care about the money you bring, the status you can afford, not how hard you've worked, not what you've built." The words landed with a sharp sting. Marcus felt the heat rise in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral, unwilling to give Victor the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. He'd fought too long, worked too hard to let this man, this stranger, define him. As the plane leveled out, the lights inside the cabin dimmed slightly, signaling that the crew was preparing for their in-flight service. The flight attendants moved down the aisles, offering drinks, and for a moment, the atmosphere shifted. The hum of the plane, the clink of glassware, the soft shuffle of footsteps. They all blended into a familiar, calming background noise. But Victor was far from finished. He leaned in again, this time with a question that cut deeper than any of his earlier remarks. "Tell me, Marcus," he asked, his voice so smooth it was almost a purr, "what exactly do you think you're going to do with all this? All the money? All the success? You think that's going to protect you in a world like this? You think you're one of us now?" Marcus turned his head slowly, meeting Victor's gaze for the first time since the last jab. The question hung in the air between them, its implication clear. "What are you really worth, Marcus? Not just your money, but your worth as a person, in Victor's world." Marcus could feel the weight of those words, the subtle assumption that he wasn't truly a part of the world he had worked so hard to step into. He let the silence stretch, taking a deep breath before speaking. "You don't get it, do you?" Marcus's voice was steady, each word carefully measured. "I didn't come here for your validation. I didn't build what I have for anyone else. I did it because I had no choice. I did it because I had to, because that's how I survive. Money doesn't protect you from people like you, people who think they own the world because they can buy their way into any room." Victor's lips tightened, but he didn't back off. Instead, he leaned in a little closer, his cold blue eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "You still don't get it. You think you're different, but you're not. You're just another guy with a little cash in his pocket and big dreams. And people like me, we control the game. We decide who gets to play." Marcus felt a sharp pang in his chest, anger mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite place. He had spent years fighting to build something real, and yet in a single conversation, Victor was trying to tear it all down, reduce him to nothing more than a lucky guy with cash. Marcus could feel the sharp edges of Victor's words pressing into him, but instead of flinching, he squared his shoulders. "I'm not playing your game," Marcus replied, his voice low and firm. "I've already won. You're not the one in control here. Not anymore." Victor's smirk faltered, but only for a brief moment. He didn't want to show weakness. "You're delusional," he muttered, but his eyes betrayed him, a flicker of uncertainty, a small crack in the veneer of his confidence. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same mocking smile. But Marcus saw it. He knew Victor wasn't as untouchable as he wanted everyone to believe. As the conversation fizzled out, the plane settled into a tense quiet. The flight attendants continued their rounds, serving drinks and snacks, but the space between Marcus and Victor remained thick with unspoken tension. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest, his mind racing. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how much Victor's words had stung. Not because they were true, but because they tapped into something deeper. The fear that, no matter how far he had come, he would always be seen as an outsider, an imposter in a world that would never accept him. But he couldn't afford to dwell on that. Not now. The plane started to bank slightly as it began its descent toward Miami. The turbulence had subsided, but the emotional storm inside Marcus was still raging. He had made it this far, despite people like Victor, despite every obstacle that had been thrown his way. And now, with Miami just minutes away, Marcus couldn't help but wonder, was this the moment when everything would change? Or was it just the beginning of something even more complicated? The descent was smooth, but the tension in the cabin was anything but. Marcus could feel the change in the air as the plane dropped lower, Miami's skyline now visible on the horizon, bathed in the soft, fading light of the evening. The city looked inviting, almost welcoming, like a new beginning. But Marcus wasn't fooled. He could still feel the sting of Victor's words, still hear that condescending tone in his head, as if Victor's judgment was a shadow that followed him wherever he went. Victor, however, seemed to have settled into a quiet confidence, his earlier jabs now turning into a silence that was more menacing than before. He no longer spoke, but Marcus could feel his eyes on him, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The fight that had been building between them wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning to take shape. The flight attendants began preparing the cabin for landing, moving down the aisles with their usual precision, offering final drinks and tidying up the trays. But Marcus was no longer paying attention to the minor details around him. His focus was solely on Victor, on the unspoken challenge between them. The man sitting next to him had no idea what it was like to build something from nothing, to fight for every inch of ground you gained, to make something out of the scraps you were given. And Victor, with his wealth and arrogance, didn't deserve to look down on him like this. As the final moments of the flight ticked away, the cabin lights dimmed further, casting long shadows over the faces of the passengers. Marcus was still trying to shake off the feeling of being out of place, but his mind was a whirlwind, his thoughts darting between the challenges that awaited him in Miami and the unsettling interaction with Victor. There was still a lot at stake. In the row behind them, a man cleared his throat, shifting in his seat as he glanced nervously at the unfolding drama between Marcus and Victor. It was clear that the tension hadn't gone unnoticed. The hum of the engines was almost deafening now, the noise filling the space where words had failed to bridge the gap between the two men. For a moment, Marcus closed his eyes, trying to center himself. He wasn't just here for the business deal in Miami. He was here to show himself that he belonged. But then, Victor shifted in his seat again, breaking the fragile quiet. "You know," Victor began, his voice still smooth but now laced with something darker, something more personal. "I think it's cute, really, the way you think you're one of us. But trust me, this isn't your world. You're just a visitor here." The words stung, but this time Marcus was ready. He'd heard them before, from people who thought they were entitled to everything just because of their bank accounts, their skin color, or the circles they moved in. But Marcus wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Marcus turned slowly, meeting Victor's gaze head-on. His chest was tight, his fists clenched on the armrests, but he refused to let the anger bubble over. Victor's words were nothing new. They were just another attempt to put him in his place, to remind him of the hierarchy Victor believed in so deeply. But Marcus wasn't having it. Not anymore. "I don't need your approval," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension. "I'm not trying to fit into your world, Langston. I've built my own." Victor's lips twitched into that familiar, dismissive smile, but there was something different about it now, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. For a moment, Marcus could see it. The man was rattled, whether he wanted to admit it or not. He might have money and power, but Marcus had something Victor could never have: resilience, the ability to keep pushing no matter the odds. The flight attendants continued their work, oblivious to the quiet battle playing out just a few seats away. But Marcus wasn't focused on them. His thoughts had shifted. He wasn't just trying to prove a point to Victor anymore. This was about something bigger. It was about standing tall, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. didn't deserve a seat at the table. As the plane started to bank, signaling the final approach into Miami, Marcus's stomach tightened. He wasn't sure if it was the anticipation of landing or the fear of what was coming next. The game between him and Victor wasn't over, but the rules were changing. What had started as a small confrontation was now escalating, and Marcus could feel it in his bones. Victor sat back in his seat, crossing his arms and glaring at Marcus. But the power dynamic was shifting. The smirk that had once been so confident now seemed like a mask that was beginning to slip. Marcus wasn't just a man in a tattered jacket anymore. He was a force, and Victor was starting to realize it. As the plane touched down, the familiar sound of the wheels hitting the tarmac felt oddly grounding, like the start of something new. The flight attendants began their final checks, preparing for landing. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the business deal that awaited him in Miami. He was thinking about how far he'd come, how much he'd fought to get to this point, and how no matter what Victor thought, no matter what anyone thought, he was going to keep moving forward. When the plane came to a full stop at the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their arrival in Miami. Passengers began to stir, gathering their belongings and preparing to deboard. Marcus sat still for a moment, allowing the noise of the cabin to fade into the background. He wasn't quite ready to face what came next, but when he stood up and retrieved his bag from the overhead compartment, he caught Victor's eye once again. This time, there was no smirk, just a cold, calculated stare. Marcus knew Victor had thought he'd won, but the real game had just begun. The terminal at Miami International Airport was bustling with activity as passengers filed off the plane, each lost in their own world. Marcus grabbed his duffel bag from the overhead compartment, slinging it over his shoulder as he stood up, stretching his legs. The brief exchange with Victor was still fresh in his mind, and though he had managed to hold his ground on the plane, there was a gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. Miami represented everything he had worked for, his business deal, the opportunity to expand. But it also felt like a battlefield where the stakes were rising with every passing second. As the passengers filtered out into the main terminal, Marcus moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the crowds. He had a meeting to attend, a supplier in town who could potentially push his business to new heights. This wasn't just about surviving this flight or dealing with Victor's insults anymore. This was his life on the line, but that didn't mean Marcus could just shake off the tension that had settled deep within him. He could still feel the sting of Victor's words, that judgmental tone that had dismissed everything he'd worked for. He wanted to let it go, wanted to focus on the task ahead, but the confrontation with Victor was far from over in his mind. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. There were moments in life when you let the weight of someone's words pass over you, but then there were others, moments when you couldn't ignore it anymore. And right now, with every step he took through the crowded terminal, it felt like that moment was closing in on him. As he approached the escalators leading to the departure area, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He fished it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from his business partner, Jamal, confirming the details of the meeting. Marcus quickly typed a response, confirming that he would be there in 20 minutes. The rhythm of the day was starting to pick up again, a welcome distraction from the weight of his thoughts. But just as he was about to pocket his phone, another message appeared. This one was from an unknown number. The message was short, almost cryptic. "I saw what happened on the flight. We need to talk." Marcus felt a slight tightening in his chest. Who could it be? Was it someone who had witnessed the scene with Victor? His fingers hovered over the screen, the curiosity gnawing at him. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but he knew one thing for certain. There was no way he could ignore this. Marcus stared at the message for a few moments, his thoughts racing. Who would be reaching out to him about the flight? Could it be someone from the cabin? Maybe one of the passengers who had witnessed the confrontation with Victor? The phrase, "we need to talk," didn't exactly bring comfort. It felt ominous, like a prelude to something that could either help or make things worse. But Marcus wasn't the type to shy away from challenges, and whatever this was, it wasn't going to derail him. He quickly typed a reply, trying to keep his response neutral. "Who is this?" he sent, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. But his mind still on Victor, the tension from the flight, and the weight of what was to come. The reply came almost immediately. You don't know me, but I saw what Victor Langston did on the plane. I have information that can help you. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. This was no coincidence. Someone had seen through Victor's charade. The words, I have information that can help you, lingered in his mind like a promise, a lifeline that he hadn't expected. What exactly did this person know? And how could it change the game that was already set in motion? He quickly punched in a reply. Meet me at Cafe Miami in 30 minutes. I'll be there. With a quick swipe, Marcus closed the conversation, stuffing the phone back into his pocket. He had little time to waste. He needed to stay focused. The business deal awaited him, but this new development felt like the key to something much bigger than just the deal itself. This might be the piece of the puzzle that could expose Victor for what he truly was. As he stepped out of the terminal into the warm Miami air, the heat immediately hit him, thick, humid, in a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment of the plane. He could feel the tension that had built up inside him begin to lift just a little, replaced by a sense of urgency. He couldn't let this slip away. Victor had tried to make him feel small, like he didn't belong. But now with this new contact, it was clear that the tables were beginning to turn. The next few minutes felt like an eternity as he made his way to the cafe. The streets were busy, the sounds of traffic and chatter filling the air, but Marcus hardly noticed any of it. His thoughts were consumed by the message, by the possibility of turning the tide against Victor. When he arrived at the cafe, he scanned the area. The place was bustling with people, all enjoying their drinks, but none of them looked like someone who would send him a mysterious text. He walked inside, his eyes darting between the tables. He didn't want to appear too eager, but he couldn't help it. His curiosity was getting the better of him. It didn't take long for a figure to approach him from the back. A woman, probably in her late 20s, wearing a casual dress, her eyes scanning the room as if making sure she wasn't being watched. She made her way toward him with purpose, and as she got closer, Marcus felt the weight of recognition hit him. I'm Carla, she said, her voice low and steady as she extended her hand. You're Marcus Tate, right? He nodded, shaking her hand, still trying to place where he had seen her before. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Her expression was calm, but there was an intensity in her eyes that made him wary. You said you have information that can help me. What's this about? Carla took a seat across from him, her eyes scanning the room before she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. I filmed what happened on the plane, she said, her words crisp and deliberate. The whole confrontation, the coffee spill, everything. Marcus felt a jolt of surprise run through him. She had been recording the incident? Had others seen it too? What do you mean, everything? He asked, leaning forward now, his pulse quickening. I'm sure you've realized by now that Victor Langston isn't exactly who he says he is, Carla continued. What he did to you on that plane, planting the money in your bag, trying to frame you for theft, that wasn't an accident, and I have the footage to prove it. Marcus's mind raced. This was bigger than he had anticipated. If this footage could prove Victor's actions, it would change everything. It was a chance to turn the tables, to expose Victor for the manipulator he truly was. But why would you help me? Marcus asked, still trying to process everything. You don't even know me. Carla met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Because it's not just about you, she said quietly. It's about all the people Victor's hurt, the systems he's used to stay on top. I've had enough of people like him thinking they can get away with anything. The weight of her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He knew that feeling all too well, the need to stand up for something bigger than yourself. This was his chance to finally take Victor down, to expose him not just as a fraud, but as someone who had manipulated and mistreated countless people to get ahead. The next few minutes passed in a blur as Carla pulled out her phone, opening the file on the video. As the footage played, Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. Every moment of the flight, the tension, the insults, it was all there. But it was the part with the $50 bill that made his blood run cold. He could see Victor slipping the bill into Marcus's duffel bag, the casual way he did it, as if he were setting up a trap. The evidence was undeniable. Carla looked at him, her eyes now burning with a quiet resolve. We can't let him get away with this, Marcus. You have the power now. Let's use it. Marcus sat back, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Victor might have thought he had won, but he hadn't seen this coming. This was only the beginning. Marcus sat in the cafe, the faint hum of background chatter blending with the rushing thoughts inside his mind. The video that Carla had shown him was still fresh, playing on loop in his head. The footage was a goldmine, proof that Victor Langston had framed him. It was damning evidence that could expose the truth, but Marcus knew it wasn't going to be as simple as just showing it to the right people. As he stared at the coffee cup in front of him, now long cold, the weight of the situation sank deeper. Victor was a powerful man. He controlled so much: his businesses, his reputation, and by extension, a network of people who would do whatever it took to protect him. This wasn't just about getting revenge on some arrogant businessman who'd insulted him on a plane. This was about taking down a system built on manipulation and power, and Marcus had the chance to disrupt it all. Carla was watching him closely, her expression unreadable as she waited for him to process everything. She could see the wheels turning in his head, the gears of strategy already in motion. "So, what's the next move?" she asked, her voice quiet, but with an edge of urgency. Marcus took a deep breath, still staring at the phone screen, where Victor's face glared back at him from the video. He had thought about this moment for a long time. His entire life had been a fight for survival, for respect. But now it was different. This wasn't just a fight for his reputation. It was about exposing the hypocrisy and corruption that allowed people like Victor to thrive unchecked. This was bigger than him. "I need to get the video to the right people," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But it's not just about showing it to the authorities. We need to go public. We need to make sure that Victor's manipulation doesn't just go away with a quick apology or a fine. People need to see the truth." Carla nodded, her eyes flicking to the phone in her hand. "I've already uploaded it to a few trusted news outlets. It's going viral, but it's not enough to just get the video out. We need to make sure people understand the full picture, the story behind it." Marcus tapped the table with his fingers, a plan beginning to take shape in his mind. "Right. We can't just let it be about the money or the theft. We need to make it clear that this is part of a bigger pattern with Victor. His business practices, the way he destroys lives to get ahead, this isn't a one-time thing. People need to see the kind of man he really is." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "We expose his entire empire, the corruption, the manipulation, his influence. We show the world that he's not just some rich businessman, he's a predator, and it's time for people to see him as one." Carla's eyes lit up. "You're thinking about going all the way, bringing him down, not just the flight incident." Marcus nodded, the intensity in his gaze matching the resolve in his chest. "It's the only way. If we can show the world what Victor's really like, we can get the attention we need. The media, the public, even the people who work for him, they'll start asking questions." The plan was risky, but Marcus was more certain now than ever. He wasn't going to let Victor get away with this. Not this time. Carla leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming lightly on the edge of her coffee cup as she weighed Marcus's words. "You realize this could get messy, right? You're talking about taking down someone who has connections in every corner of the city. His reach goes beyond just the business world. People like him have lawyers, politicians, even the media in their pockets." Marcus met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "I know the risks, but it's not just about taking down Victor. It's about making sure no one else like him ever feels invincible. If we don't act now, nothing will change." Carla sat silently for a moment, clearly processing the magnitude of Marcus's determination. "So what do you need from me?" Her voice was quieter now, less guarded. "I need help with the logistics," Marcus replied, his tone firm but focused. "I've got the video, but I can't just release it and wait for the world to take action. We need a strategy, something that puts pressure on Victor from all sides. Public opinion, legal action, even pushing for a deeper investigation into his business dealings. We need it all to come together." Carla nodded thoughtfully, then pulled out her phone again. "I can help with the media side. I have contacts who can get this video to the right journalists, ones who aren't afraid to take on people like Victor. But you're right. If this is going to work, we need the full story. Not just the video, but evidence. Proof that he's been operating like this for years. Marcus rubbed his jaw, his mind already racing ahead to the next phase. We start digging. We find his connections, the shady deals he's been making. We get proof of his illegal actions, whatever it takes. If I'm going to take down this empire, I need to make sure there's no way he can talk his way out of it. Carla gave a small smile, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. You're serious about this? Marcus returned the smile, though it was tempered by the weight of what was to come. I've spent my whole life being underestimated, being told I don't belong. If I don't take this chance, I'll be the one who loses. She stood up, gathering her things. I'll get started on my end. You'll have the media contacts in a few hours. In the meantime, I'll do some digging of my own. Marcus stood with her, shaking her hand firmly. Thank you, Carla. You have no idea how much this means. As she walked away, Marcus felt the gravity of the situation settle in once more. There was no turning back now. The stakes had gone from personal to something much bigger. He was about to challenge a man who had lived a lifetime exploiting others. And now Marcus had the power to bring him down. But it wasn't just about Victor. This fight was about setting a precedent, about showing that even the most powerful couldn't escape justice forever. Marcus knew that the road ahead would be long, dangerous, and filled with unexpected turns. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path, his own path. And this time, he wasn't going to let anyone stop him. Marcus sat in his car outside Victor Langston's high-rise office building, the faint hum of the engine the only sound that filled the silence. The city lights of Miami glittered in the distance, casting a glow that seemed to mock his resolve. He had come so far, from the hard streets of Chicago to this moment, standing on the precipice of something that could either make or break him. The plan was in motion, but there was no guarantee that things would go according to plan. The night felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the weight of the decisions he had made, or the anticipation of what was about to unfold. He glanced at the time on his phone, 9:30 p.m. Victor would be finishing up his work soon, getting ready to head home. Marcus needed to act before the night slipped away, before the opportunity passed. Taking a deep breath, he reached over and grabbed the envelope from the passenger seat, his fingers brushing over the cold, hard paper. Inside, there was everything he needed: photographs, emails, contracts, and other damning pieces of evidence from Victor's various business dealings. The evidence wasn't just enough to get his attention, it was enough to destroy him. Marcus didn't care about destroying Victor personally, but he was willing to take down anyone who used their position to crush others. Victor's empire had been built on deceit, manipulation, and lies, and it was time for it to all come crashing down. Marcus wasn't going to let him walk away from this. He opened the door of the car, the cool evening air hitting his skin. He pulled on the leather jacket that had come to symbolize his struggle, his survival, and stepped onto the pavement. Each step felt deliberate, the click of his boots against the concrete sounding louder than usual as he made his way toward the front entrance. The building's marble floors and shiny glass doors reflected his figure, but for once Marcus didn't flinch. He approached the front desk and gave a small nod to the receptionist, who glanced at him with a polite but guarded smile. "How can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see Mr. Langston," Marcus replied, his voice calm but carrying an authority he hadn't expected. The receptionist hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her face as she glanced at the visitor log. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her voice friendly but stern. "No," Marcus said, meeting her gaze, "but I'm sure Mr. Langston will want to see me." The receptionist gave him an uncertain look, but after a long pause, she picked up the phone and dialed. Marcus held his breath, the tension rising as he waited for Victor's secretary to pick up. After a moment, she gave him a short nod and told him to head to the elevator. He knew then that this was his chance. There was no going back now. Marcus stepped into the elevator, his heart pounding in his chest. The doors slid shut with a soft ding, and he felt the weight of the journey ahead settle on him. The elevator moved upward, its smooth motion a stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts swirling inside his mind. He kept his eyes on the digital floor counter as it ticked higher, his fingers tapping nervously against his jacket. Every floor that passed was a reminder of how high he was climbing, both literally and metaphorically. The last few months of his life had led to this moment. He had spent countless hours strategizing, gathering evidence, and preparing for the confrontation that was inevitable. But now, as the building's sleek upper floors loomed closer, Marcus couldn't ignore the gravity of what he was about to do. He wasn't just confronting Victor Langston, he was challenging everything that Victor represented: the greed, the power, the manipulation. This was more than just a personal vendetta. This was a stand against the system that had allowed men like Victor to thrive. The elevator stopped and the doors opened to reveal a hallway lined with expensive artwork and polished glass panels. Marcus took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and stepped out, his boots clicking sharply against the marble floor. He could hear the hum of voices from a few doors down. He knew Victor's office had to be just ahead. Every step he took seemed to echo louder, and he could feel the weight of every decision that had led him here pressing down on his shoulders. At the end of the hall stood a set of double doors, guarded by two security personnel. They glanced at him, their expressions unreadable, before one of them held up a hand. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see Mr. Langston," Marcus replied, his tone steady, though the tension in his muscles was palpable. The guards exchanged a brief look before one of them reached for his earpiece and murmured something into it. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, sizing him up, but he refused to let their scrutiny affect him. After a long moment, the guard nodded and opened the door. Victor's office was everything Marcus had expected. It was massive, luxurious, furnished with dark wood, leather chairs, and a panoramic view of the Miami skyline. Victor Langston stood by the window, his back to Marcus, staring out over the city as if it were his kingdom. The moment Marcus stepped inside, Victor turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in the man standing before him. "You really thought you could take me down?" Victor's voice was cool, a confident sneer tugging at the corners of his mouth. "What do you think you're going to do here, Marcus? You're out of your league." Marcus took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Victor's. "I think I've been in your league for a long time," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's time to show the world who you really are." Victor's smirk faltered for just a second. Marcus saw it. He could sense that crack in the armor. For a moment it seemed like Victor wasn't the untouchable powerhouse he had always believed himself to be. Marcus's heart beat faster, and he knew that this moment, right here, was the beginning of the end. Victor recovered quickly, regaining his composure. "You really think you have what it takes? You're nothing but a mechanic with a chip on your shoulder. You think people are going to believe your story over mine?" "I think people are going to believe the truth," Marcus replied, his voice steady and resolute. "I've got the evidence, and you've got nothing but lies. You won't get away with this anymore." Victor's eyes flicked to the envelope in Marcus's hand, the envelope that contained everything Victor had tried so hard to hide. His smirk returned, but now it was colder, more dangerous. "You think that little envelope is going to make a difference? You're too late, Marcus. This game is already over." Marcus stepped closer, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. This was it. There was no turning back now. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. Marcus stood in front of Victor Langston, the tension thick between them. The weight of the moment settled over him like a storm cloud. He had come here to confront a man who had used his power to hurt so many, to expose the truth. But now that he was face to face with Victor, it felt surreal. The massive office with its sweeping views of Miami's skyline, the polished floors beneath his feet, and the scent of expensive leather, all of it seemed so far removed from the rough Chicago streets Marcus had fought to climb out of. But he wasn't here to be intimidated. He was here to take control. Victor's smug smile remained, though Marcus could sense a flicker of uncertainty behind it. "You think you can change anything?" Victor's voice was sharp, his posture still that of a man who believed himself invincible. "The media? A few videos? You think that's going to bring down a man like me?" "I think it's a start," Marcus replied, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "You've been hiding behind lies and manipulation for too long. It's time for the truth to come out." Victor's eyes narrowed. Truth? He scoffed, taking a step closer. The truth is, you're just a mechanic trying to play in a world you don't belong in, and you're about to learn that there are consequences for people who try to bring me down. Marcus felt the anger rise within him, but he kept it in check. He had prepared for this moment, prepared for Victor's arrogance. But now the real battle was beginning. Victor wasn't just going to give up without a fight. He would twist the narrative, manipulate the story, and try to bury the truth beneath layers of lies. Victor reached for his desk, pulling out a folder and tossing it casually onto the surface. "This is what you don't understand, Marcus," he said, his voice turning cold. "You're playing a game you can't win. This," he gestured to the folder, "is my backup. You think you have proof? I have 100 ways to bury it, 100 lawyers who will make sure no one ever hears your side of the story." Marcus glanced down at the folder, his mind already calculating his next move. He wasn't here to play by Victor's rules. He wasn't here to let Victor control the narrative. He had seen this kind of manipulation before, and he wasn't about to let it work on him. "I'm not here to play, Victor," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "I'm here to finish this." Victor gave a soft chuckle, his eyes gleaming with self-assurance. "Finish it? You're nothing. You don't have the power to finish anything." "Then let's see," Marcus said, his gaze unwavering as he slid the envelope across the desk toward Victor. Inside was everything. The video, the emails, the contracts, everything that Victor had tried so hard to hide. Victor's expression faltered just for a split second, but it was enough. The reality was hitting him. Marcus wasn't just some man with a grudge. He had the evidence, and now Victor could see it was real. The smile fell from his face as he picked up the envelope, his fingers trembling as he opened it. "What is this?" Victor's voice was low now, a mix of disbelief and anger. Marcus watched him carefully, a small sense of satisfaction washing over him. This was the moment where everything shifted. Victor Langston had always believed he could control the world around him, but Marcus was proving that no one was beyond the reach of the truth. Victor's eyes flickered over the documents, his face tightening with every page he turned. The video file was the last one in the envelope, and he hesitated for just a moment before clicking on it. The room grew heavy with silence as the footage began to play. Marcus stood perfectly still, watching Victor's expression shift from disbelief to fury, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the desk. Victor slammed the envelope shut, his eyes blazing. "You think this is going to bring me down?" His voice was low, but the venom was unmistakable. "You're making a mistake, Marcus. People like me don't fall because of a little thing like truth." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "You've built your empire on lies, Victor, and it's crumbling now. People are going to see you for who you really are. You won't be able to run from it." Victor stood abruptly, the chair screeching across the floor as he pushed it back. He paced in front of the window, clearly rattled now. "You think you can destroy me with a few videos, a few documents? This isn't how this works. You're just one man, and you're about to learn how quickly the world can turn on you." Marcus remained calm, his resolve unshaken. "I'm not alone, Victor, and neither are you." His voice was steady, but there was a power in the way he spoke, as if he knew that this was the turning point. "The world is watching now. I've already got the press involved. People are starting to hear the truth." Victor's face twisted in a mixture of rage and contempt. "You're playing with fire, Marcus. I will bury you. You think this is justice? What you're doing is a foolish mistake." Marcus felt the weight of those words, but he didn't flinch. He had been underestimated his entire life, and this moment was no different. "No, Victor, this is justice. Your justice. The one you thought you could control with money, power, and lies? But it's over now." Victor's voice dropped into a dangerous whisper as he turned to face Marcus. "You'll regret this. You've crossed a line you can't come back from." There was something dark in his eyes now, a threat that Marcus didn't miss. The air seemed to thicken with the promise of something more, something that went beyond the paperwork on the desk. For a moment, Marcus considered walking away, leaving Victor to stew in his own bitterness. But he knew better. This was far from over. "We'll see," Marcus replied, his voice sharp as a blade. "I'm not walking away, not this time." Victor stood there for a beat longer, His eyes narrowed, calculating. Then, without warning, he grabbed his phone off the desk and dialed something quickly. His gaze never left Marcus. "I'm calling in a favor," he muttered, his words dripping with menace. "You've made a serious mistake." Marcus knew that Victor would try to use whatever power he had left. The man had the connections, the influence, and he was used to having everything go his way. But Marcus wasn't backing down now. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he didn't make a move. He knew he had already won. All he had to do was hold his ground. As Victor spoke in a low voice on the phone, Marcus felt the storm building around him. He didn't know what Victor would do next, but he was prepared for whatever came. The game had changed. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone Victor had wronged, for every person who had ever been crushed by the weight of power and privilege. Victor hung up the phone with a look of satisfaction that made Marcus uneasy. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he sneered. "And when this all blows over, I'll make sure you regret ever stepping into my world." But Marcus wasn't intimidated. He stood tall, unwavering, and said, "You may think you're untouchable, Victor, but the world is changing, and no matter what happens, I'll be ready for whatever you throw at me." Victor's eyes flickered with something like uncertainty now, but it was quickly replaced with a new kind of determination. "Then you're a fool," he said coldly, "but enjoy the moment, because this is the last time you'll ever feel in control." Marcus sat in the dimly lit room, the weight of the confrontation with Victor still heavy on his shoulders. His mind was a whirl of thoughts, calculating, planning, preparing. He had dealt with powerful men before, but this was different. Victor wasn't just any man. He was the embodiment of everything Marcus had spent his life fighting against. Corruption, manipulation, privilege. Victor had made his empire on the backs of others, and now Marcus was in a position to bring it all down. He stared at the screen of his laptop, the flashing cursor taunting him as if it were waiting for his next move. The footage Carla had recorded was already spreading like wildfire, and it wasn't just local news. The video was gaining traction on national platforms. The whispers of Victor's misdeeds were turning into a roar. But Marcus knew that wasn't enough. The world needed more than a viral video. The truth had to be delivered in a way that no one could ignore. And Marcus wasn't about to let Victor off the hook just because people were starting to talk. It was time to take action. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He glanced down, his brow furrowing as he saw the name on the screen. Lena Carter, his lawyer. She had been handling the legal side of things, making sure everything was airtight. If there was one person who could help him navigate this mess, it was Lena. "Marcus," she said, her voice calm but urgent, "we need to talk." "I'm listening," Marcus replied, sitting up straighter, the sudden tension in his chest making it harder to breathe. "Something's come up," Lena continued. "I've been going over the details of your case, and there's something bigger at play here than we originally thought. It's not just Victor we're dealing with. He's got connections in high places, powerful people, and they're starting to take notice of your actions." Marcus's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? Are they going to stop me?" Lena's voice lowered. "Not yet, but if we don't act quickly, we could be in serious trouble. Victor has allies, and some of them are already making moves behind the scenes to protect him. I'm telling you this because we need to prepare for the next step. This is bigger than just a personal vendetta now. This is a battle that could change everything." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He had expected resistance from Victor, but not from the people who stood behind him. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. He couldn't let Victor, or anyone else, get away with what they had done. "I'm not backing down," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind in his mind. "What do we do next?" Lena paused for a moment, then spoke with a sense of finality. "We go after his empire. We hit him where it hurts the most." Marcus felt a spark of resolve igniting in him. The time for playing nice was over. It was time to take the fight to Victor, and this time, he wasn't going to stop until the entire empire crumbled. Lena's words echoed in Marcus's mind as he sat in the stillness of his office, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "We hit him where it hurts the most." The phrase resonated with a deep, raw truth. Marcus knew that to take Victor Langston down, they had to go beyond the video, beyond the press. They had to strip him of everything he held dear, his wealth, his influence, his power. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his desk, as he thought about the next steps. Lena had already started digging into Victor's financial dealings, and Marcus had a few of his own contacts to help with the investigation. They had a shot if they moved fast and decisively, but it was risky. There was no room for error, no second chances. "We need to find everything," Marcus said, his voice sharp with determination. "Every dirty deal, every illegal investment, anything we can use to tie Victor to corruption or fraud. We need the public to see him as the criminal he is, not just some rich businessman who's above the law." Lena's voice was calm but firm. "I've already spoken to a few people who are close to Victor's inner circle. If we can get access to his private accounts, the deals he's been involved in, they'll give us the leverage we need. But we'll have to move quickly. If he catches wind of what we're doing, he'll shut it down before it even gets off the ground." Marcus nodded, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in days. For too long, people like Victor had acted with impunity. They believed their wealth and connections would protect them, that no one could ever challenge them. But Marcus was here to prove them wrong. He had fought too hard to back down now. He couldn't let Victor's empire stand any longer. "Get me the documents," Marcus said, his jaw set. "Whatever you can find, bring it to me. I'll handle the rest." Lena paused for a moment, then spoke with quiet certainty. "I'll make it happen, Marcus. But remember, you're not just going after Victor. This is going to shake up everything. The people he's connected to will come after you. Be prepared." Marcus exhaled slowly, letting the reality of the situation settle in. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, fighting for respect, fighting for justice. But now it wasn't just about him. This was bigger. It was about exposing the system that allowed people like Victor to thrive at the expense of others. It was about ensuring that the people who had suffered at Victor's hands would finally get the justice they deserved. "I'm ready," Marcus said, his voice resolute. "Let's bring him down." As he hung up the phone, Marcus stood up, walking over to the window of his office. The city sprawled out before him, its lights flickering in the distance. A symbol of the power and wealth that people like Victor used to manipulate the system. But now it felt different. Marcus was no longer just a spectator in the game. He was in it, and he was ready to change the rules. With a final glance at the skyline, he turned away from the window and sat back at his desk. The real work was about to begin. Marcus sat in the dimly lit cafe, his laptop open in front of him, the glow from the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. The evidence was piling up. Victor's illegal activities, his manipulation of the system, and the shady business dealings he thought were buried. But it wasn't enough. The deeper Marcus dug, the more he realized that Victor's empire was built on a foundation of corruption and lies that extended far beyond what he could have anticipated. The truth was more complicated than he had imagined, and each discovery only made the stakes higher. The documents Lena had retrieved were crucial, an intricate web of fake companies, offshore accounts, and fraudulent contracts. But there was a catch. As Lena had warned, the people connected to Victor were far more dangerous than he had realized. Powerful politicians, law enforcement officials, and even media moguls were involved in protecting him. The moment Marcus started pulling at the threads, he knew he was stepping into a web that could destroy everything he had built. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't just a fight for his own freedom anymore. It was a battle to expose a system of abuse that had gone unchecked for too long. If he moved too quickly or made one wrong move, it could all collapse in an instant. But Marcus wasn't backing down. He'd spent his life proving others wrong, and he wasn't about to let Victor or anyone else stand in his way. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, the reality of what he was about to do hitting him all at once. "I need more," he muttered to himself, staring at the screen. He had the documents, but he needed something bigger, a smoking gun that would make the public demand accountability. Something that couldn't be ignored or swept under the rug by the people with enough power to silence him. He glanced down at his phone. The screen lit up with a new message from Lena. The message was short, but the weight of it made his heart race. "They're on to us. Victor's people are starting to circle. We need to move fast." The warning was clear. Victor's influence was reaching further than they thought. If they didn't act soon, everything Marcus had worked for would be destroyed before it ever had a chance to make a real impact. The walls were closing in. Marcus stood up, the decision already made. He had come this far, and there was no going back. It was time to take the fight to Victor's doorstep, literally. Marcus left the cafe with a renewed sense of urgency. The weight of Lena's message still lingered in his mind as he walked down the quiet, empty streets. He had no time to waste. Victor's network was vast, and every moment they hesitated was another moment for Victor to strengthen his grip. Marcus had come to realize that he couldn't just fight with the evidence alone. He needed to strike at the heart of the problem, to expose the corruption on a grand scale, and he needed to do it quickly. As he walked, Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket and called Lena. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Marcus." Her voice was tense, and he could hear the background noise of her office, the urgency still clear in her tone. "You've got to move fast. I've had people looking into Victor's closest allies. We found something big. But I don't know how long we have before it disappears." Marcus's pulse quickened at the mention of something big. "What do you have?" he asked, his voice low, keeping his focus ahead. "There's a deal, Marcus. A final deal that Victor's been working on in secret," Lena continued. "It involves a multi-million-dollar investment in a luxury development project that he's been negotiating with some of the biggest names in real estate. If we can get the right documentation, we can use it to show his deep ties to illegal operations. It's all tied up in offshore accounts, hidden away from public view, but it's there." Marcus clenched his jaw, the path ahead becoming clearer. "We need to get that paperwork now. If we expose this, it'll break him. It'll break everything he's been building." Lena's voice grew serious. "I'll get my contacts on it immediately. But Marcus, this is a delicate operation. If we're not careful, it could backfire. Victor's allies are ruthless, and they'll stop at nothing to protect him." "I'm not backing down," Marcus said firmly, his voice unwavering. "This is our chance. If we pull this off, we can hit him where it hurts most. His reputation, his financial empire. This could take him down for good." "All right," Lena responded, her voice softening. "I'm with you. I'll start making calls and gather all the intel we can. But we need to move fast before Victor catches wind of what we're doing." "Thanks, Lena," Marcus said, hanging up. As he slid his phone back into his pocket, he felt a spark of hope. This was the break he had been waiting for. They finally had something big to expose Victor's empire for what it really was. But Marcus knew the battle was far from over. The deeper he got into this fight, the more dangerous it became. He arrived at his office just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city streets. He knew this was a turning point. He could feel it in his bones. With the documents Lena was going to uncover, the walls around Victor's empire would begin to crumble. But Marcus also knew that if he wasn't careful, those same walls could come crashing down on him too. The pieces were finally falling into place, but the road ahead was still fraught with danger. All he could do now was trust the plan, stay one step ahead of Victor, and pray that the truth would be enough to bring him down. Marcus paced back and forth in his office, his mind racing. Lena's phone call had sent his thoughts spiraling into overdrive. He had what he needed, almost. The documents were in hand, the evidence was overwhelming, but now the real test began, exposing Victor Langston for what he truly was. Victor had always been 2 steps ahead, and Marcus knew he couldn't afford any missteps. The stakes were higher than they'd ever been. His fingers hovered over his phone, considering his next move. The information Lena had gathered could bring the entire structure of Victor's empire to the ground, but it also painted a massive target on Marcus's back. The people who protected Victor weren't just businessmen. They were powerful figures with connections that stretched into law enforcement, politics, and even the media. Marcus had been fighting against the system for years, but now it was personal. He thought about his family, his friends, the people who'd helped him along the way. All of them were counting on him. If he failed, it wasn't just his life on the line anymore. It was theirs too. A knock on the door broke his reverie, and he straightened up instinctively. His assistant, Mia, entered the room, her face unreadable. She was usually calm, collected, but today her eyes seemed to betray a hint of worry. Marcus, she said quietly, walking over to his desk. I just got off the phone with someone from the press. They've heard about the documents you've been sitting on. They want an interview. His heart skipped a beat. This was the moment he'd been preparing for. The truth was about to break, whether he was ready or not. Who was it? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. A reporter from the Tribune, Mia replied. They've been digging into Victor for a while now, and word is they're ready to break the story. Marcus rubbed his hands together, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. The media could be both a weapon and a liability. On the one hand, they had the power to amplify his message, to expose Victor's corruption to the world. On the other, he knew that Victor's people had a way of turning the narrative in their favor. The story could easily be twisted, manipulated. Set up the interview, Marcus finally said, his voice firm with resolve. But make sure we have control over the story. I can't afford any leaks, Mia. This needs to be precise. Mia nodded and left the room, leaving Marcus to stare out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from Lena. Got the rest of the files. I'll meet you tonight. This ends now. The message was short, but it carried the weight of finality. Tonight. It would all come to a head. Marcus felt a sense of urgency flood through him. There was no more waiting. He wasn't just going to sit back and let Victor's empire continue to poison everything it touched. Tonight, he would take action. The night was approaching quickly, and with it, the final piece of Marcus's plan. He sat back down at his desk, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, was culminating in this one night. The meeting with Lena was crucial. She was the key to ensuring that the documents, the financial transactions, and all the evidence they had gathered would be used effectively. But it wasn't just about the paperwork anymore. It was about what came after, the media storm, the fallout, and how they would protect themselves from the retaliatory forces Victor would undoubtedly send. Marcus's phone buzzed again. It was an alert from the press. The headline read, Exposing a Real Estate Mogul, the Truth Behind Victor Langston's Empire. His heart raced as he opened the link, scanning the article that had just gone live. It was exactly what he had hoped for, the beginning of the unraveling. They had managed to keep control over the narrative for now, but Victor's people were sure to retaliate soon. Mia's voice interrupted his thoughts as she entered the room again, her expression urgent. Marcus, we've got a problem. His stomach sank. What happened? We've been made, she said, her eyes wide. A source within Victor's team has tipped off his lawyers. They know what we're doing, and they're preparing to fight back. They've already started digging into your background. They're using everything, every connection, every piece of dirt they can find. Marcus's jaw clenched. He had expected this, but hearing it out loud made the threat feel much more real. He couldn't back down now, not when everything was in motion. How bad is it? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Mia paused, her gaze flickering to the laptop screen. They've already begun contacting some of your investors. They're trying to discredit you, even suggest that you're not who you say you are. If they can make people doubt your integrity, they can slow the momentum. Marcus stood up, pacing again. The walls were closing in faster than he expected, but he refused to let it derail his plans. We need to move faster then. We can't let them turn the tide. We've got the press on our side now, and the more noise we make, the harder it'll be for them to shut it down. Keep pushing forward, Mia. Make sure they know we're not backing down. Mia nodded, but there was a tension in her posture that Marcus couldn't ignore. I'll do everything I can, Marcus, but you need to be ready. If this escalates, it's going to get ugly fast. Marcus met her eyes, understanding the gravity of her words. The battle had already begun, and they were at war now, whether they were ready or not. Victor would stop at nothing to preserve his empire, and Marcus was prepared to do whatever it took to make sure it came crashing down. Just then, the door opened again. Lena stepped inside, her face serious, a folder clutched in her hand. It's time, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling outside. We've got what we need. Let's finish this. Marcus met her gaze, feeling a surge of determination flood through him. Tonight wasn't just about taking down Victor. It was about taking down everything he stood for. The lies, the manipulation, the people who had been crushed under the weight of his empire. The final confrontation was at hand, and Marcus wasn't going to let anyone stop him now. Marcus stood at the front of the conference room, his hands gripping the edge of the table as he faced the small crowd before him. The walls, once adorned with expensive art, now seemed sterile, cold, like the moment that was about to unfold. This was it, the culmination of everything he had fought for, everything that had led him to this point. The media representatives sat in front of him, their cameras ready, their pens poised over notebooks. He could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. They had all gathered here for one reason, to hear the truth, and Marcus was going to give it to them, every last bit of it. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't check it. Tonight wasn't about distractions. He had a clear mission. Expose Victor Langston for the fraud he was. The man who had used his wealth and influence to crush those beneath him, to maintain a system of injustice. Lena sat at the back of the room, her eyes fixed on Marcus with quiet approval. She knew how much this meant to him, how much was riding on this moment, but even she understood that Marcus couldn't do this alone. They had both fought hard, but the press and public opinion were the real weapons now. If they could sway them, the world would know what Victor had done. Victor Langston's name was already swirling through the headlines. The story about his corrupt dealings, his ties to illegal developments, and the scandalous nature of his investments had begun to spread. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. As the reporters began to murmur among themselves, Marcus cleared his throat. I'm here today not just to tell you about Victor Langston. I'm here to show you the system that allowed him to thrive. The system that protected him, that let him manipulate the truth and walk away without facing any consequences. But no more. A few heads in the room turned. The energy shifted, the tension rising. Marcus could see the wheels turning in their heads as they processed the weight of what he had just said. But he wasn't done. He knew how important timing was. The truth had to hit hard, but it had to be delivered carefully. You see, Marcus continued, his voice steady, Victor Langston wasn't just a businessman. He was part of a much larger system, a system where the powerful stay in control and the rest of us are left to pick up the pieces. He used that power to manipulate, to silence anyone who got in his way. But the truth always has a way of coming to the surface. A reporter raised their hand, and Marcus gestured for them to speak. Mr. Tate, the reporter asked, her voice probing, how can we be sure that what you're saying is true? These are serious accusations. You're asking us to believe that Victor Langston's entire career is built on lies. Marcus didn't hesitate. I'm asking you to look at the facts. Look at the documents we've provided. The offshore accounts, the illegal investments, the deals that were made in the dark, hidden from the public eye. I'm not just saying this because I have something to gain from it. I'm saying this because I've seen the damage firsthand, and I'm tired of standing by while men like Victor Langston get away with it. The room fell silent. He could see the reporters processing, their eyes flicking between the documents on the table and his steady, unflinching gaze. They were starting to believe him. And with that belief came the power to destroy the empire that Victor had so carefully built. The silence in the room hung thick, broken only by the sound of a reporter flipping through the papers on the table. Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he held steady. This was the turning point. The last few minutes had been crucial. He could sense the shift in the room, the moment when doubt started to creep into the reporters' minds. They were beginning to question everything they had known about Victor Langston. Another reporter raised their hand, this time with a sharper edge to their question. But if Victor Langston's empire is built on corruption, why did it take you so long to come forward? Why now? What's changed? Marcus let out a quiet breath, his gaze never leaving the faces before him. Because for too long, people like Victor have been untouchable. They've used their wealth and power to hide the truth, to bury it beneath layers of lies and manipulation. But something changed. I changed. I'm not just fighting for myself anymore. I'm fighting for everyone who's been crushed by people like Victor, for all the families, the businesses, the lives ruined by men who think the rules don't apply to them. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. I'm not the only one who's been wronged here. I'm not the only one Victor has hurt. I'm just the one who's willing to stand up and speak out. That's why I'm here today, to give you the truth, to show you what's been hidden for so long. There was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. The reporters who had been skeptical, who had questioned his timing and his motives, were now leaning forward, their pens flying across their notepads. Marcus could feel the room moving towards something bigger than just the story. They were starting to understand that this wasn't just about one man's greed. It was about a system that needed to be exposed, broken down, and rebuilt. Then there was a sound, the sound of a door opening at the back of the room. Marcus turned slightly, his eyes narrowing as he saw the figure stepping into the doorway. It was Victor. His face was grim, his usual arrogance replaced with a cold, calculated expression. He had clearly been watching the interview from outside, and now he had come to make his presence known. Victor's eyes locked with Marcus's, and for a moment there was a tense standoff. Two men, each with everything to lose, staring each other down. Marcus felt a spark of something inside him, a mixture of anger, resolve, and the strange sense of satisfaction that came from knowing he was finally forcing Victor into the light. "Mr. Tate," Victor's voice broke the silence, and his words carried a venomous edge. "You're making a mistake. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. This will end badly for you. You can't fight a man like me." Marcus met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "You're wrong, Victor. This isn't about me. This is about the truth. And the truth is coming for you." Victor's lip curled into a sneer, but Marcus could see the flicker of uncertainty behind his cold eyes. Victor had always been in control, always used his power to dictate the terms of every encounter. But now, for the first time, Marcus could see that power beginning to slip. The reporters watched, silent, as the tension between the two men escalated. It was a battle of wills, a fight for dominance. But there was something else in the air now, something that couldn't be ignored. The moment was no longer about Marcus or Victor. It was about the reckoning that was long overdue. Victor took a step forward, his voice lowering, but it still rang out with authority. "You think you can expose me? You think you can destroy everything I've worked for?" His gaze flicked to the reporters. "You don't know who you're dealing with. You have no idea the power I hold." Marcus took a deep breath, holding his ground. "I know exactly who you are, Victor, and that's why this ends today." As Marcus spoke, he felt the weight of everything he had fought for coming to a head. The truth was out now, and Victor's empire was no longer the untouchable monolith it had once been. The reporters, the public, and everyone who had suffered under Victor's reign were watching, waiting for the moment when justice would finally be served. Victor's eyes flickered with something, fear maybe, or the realization that his time was running out. But in that moment, Marcus knew that the battle had already been won. No matter what Victor did, the truth had already taken root. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like victory was within reach.